My name is Bill Croyer. I'm a former governor of the Academy of this branch, and I currently run the animation program at Chapman University, and I am very happy to be moderating this panel with these stellar filmmakers. Everybody you're going to see in this panel has either an Oscar nomination or an Emmy or a VES award or an Annie Award. So rather than detail all that, just let it be known you have a very stellar panel here. First, the director, Chris Butler. The producer, Arianne Sutner. Visual effects supervisor, Steve Emerson. Director of practical effects, Oliver Jones. Production designer, Nelson Lowry. And finally, animation supervisor, Brad Schiff. You know, there's just something so different about stop motion, and I'm not sure people who know how it's made quite appreciate that, but it's a very different thing from computer graphics or hand-drawn animation. And so one thing I'll ask you, Chris, as the originator of this, is there a story or a specific thing that works better in stop motion? Is that something you think about when you're conceiving a movie to be made in stop motion?
I think that used to be the case. I think the limitations of stop motion were very physical limitations. You know, you could only tell certain kinds of stories because you were limited by set size or puppet size, but that's just not the case anymore. And I think one thing that we've been trying to do at the studio, utilizing our hybrid technologies, is to tell more expansive stories using this medium. So retain what is so beautiful and tactile about this medium, but expand the horizons, tell different kinds of stories.
Chris he doesn't pay any attention to that.
I was just getting to that. I am encouraged not to think about how something is going to be realized, which I clearly didn't on this movie. I just wrote what I wanted to write.
And this is an original story from you.
Yeah.
So what's the pitch? How do you pitch this to, how did you get this sold to the powers that be?
Indiana Jones meets Sherlock Holmes with Ray Harryhausen creatures. The other pitch that was a little bit more highbrow was if David Lean made Around the World in 80 Days starring Laurel and Hardy. That was the other one.
I think you achieved all those things. Now, you're what they call a triple threat. You're the director of this film, you're the writer of this film, and interestingly enough, you're the character designer of a lot of the characters in this film. So when you're conceiving that, I imagine when you're writing you have this in your head. But once again, I guess Arianne sort of answered this. Do you have any kind of thought about how you're going to pull these things off when you're designing these characters?
No.
Could care less.
No, I come from a 2D background, so I tend to gravitate towards more graphic designs, geometric shapes, really bold silhouettes, and that's something that I was really wanting to do on this movie. And it looks good when you're designing them, but they have to become three-dimensional puppets. Where is he? Down here. So the first drawing I ever did, I became the character designer on this kind of, well, there was a core group of us, but it was, that wasn't my intention. It's just that like you say, when I was writing, I was doing a lot of drawings because that helps me write. And there was one drawing in particular of Link that we kept coming back to, and it's been since known as the hairy avocado drawing. And there was just something that people liked about it, and I think it was just a bold, friendly shape, and that's what he became. But as you can see, you know, I'm asking animators to deal with puppet and give a nuanced performance from something that essentially doesn't have a neck or shoulders. And that's really difficult to do, isn't it, Brad?
It was. Yeah, you know, it's a challenge to bring a character like this to life, but you know, I mean, it's a team. Everything is it takes a village. It's a team effort, and our puppet builders, you know, created the most, you know, intricate puppet that we've done to date. You know, in order to get some of the nuance that Chris really wanted, you know, they incorporated a breather in him, so you know we can turn a dial and have his diaphragm come in and out to bring, you know, breathe life into him. He has a squash and stretch, so we're able to turn another dial and have him bounce up and down, which was able to allow animators to sort of save a lot of things as they were shooting and sort of compensate. And he has a belly mover, which allows his belly to bounce up and down as he's walking. And you know, within all those things, you know, it's interesting. I think at LAIKA we've proven that we can make these things feel like living, breathing creatures. And at this film, it was really the challenge was to start to make them feel like they were thinking and processing. And there was so much nonverbal communication in this movie that a lot of that was up to our facial team. So we have, the technology of the printer has advanced in such a way, and our facial team is better than it's ever been. And every facial performance is bespoke for each shot. So no two faces are ever used twice in the movie.
Wow.
How many faces, Brad?
Link alone, I think, had 40,000 faces printed.
Is it a total of 100?
No, this is the
It was 106,000 total.
Yeah, something like that.
Oh, I'm going to make up a number now, too. Guys, he's got a lot of faces.
And this is
It's a
what they
lot of
call
work. He's got more faces than we have emotions.
It's
And
called
it
rapid
turns-
prototyping, right?
That's
That's
right.
what it's called. And for those who don't know, they actually model these faces in the computer, and then they're printed out. And now, if I understand, you're actually printing these out in color
Yeah.
with color 3D printers.
Go ahead, Chris.
No, you're going to show them.
He's already removed
I've
the
already
face.
removed it. It's super creepy. But yeah, there's been a technology advancement with each film. The printing companies, they love us, and they keep giving us more, better printers. And this one, there's nothing better than the resin material that we've worked. It's precise, and the color is amazing, and you can get such subtlety. Chris was telling us, we'll tell you a story about sticky lips, so you can get the lips sticking together, and it's so beautiful and so subtle.
And for this particular movie, in the past when we used powder printers, there's a real granular quality to it. So if you have really sharp angles, they get lost. They kind of crumble away. Or if you think about Lionel's nose, it's so sharp and pointy, we wouldn't have been able to print those faces consistently on the old printers. So whenever we get new technology, we keep trying to utilize it to just keep pushing stop motion a little bit further forward.
So many thousands of faces. We should all get one next time.
Oh, party favorites.
So Arianne, this
It's
is
against the rules, guys.
the logistics are pretty awesome on a film like this. I think there were 110 sets or something, and how
Well,
many-
unique.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a kind of a management nightmare, right?
I think of the kinds of movies we do as they're like live action effects movies, but just one painful frame at a time, just really slowed down to a glacial pace. This movie, which you guys saw, thank you. We go to so many unique locations, so it's a travel movie and it spans the globe. We really only go to one location twice. So we're establishing locations like we're in a brand new country and maybe have only one shot and one time to do it. So all of these guys and all of their teams have to spend an enormous time visiting and, designing and creating and building a set that we don't return to. We also have all the usual challenges we always have challenges, every production does. And on this one, our main hero, that fella over there, he was so complicated to make, and turns out you actually need your shoulders and your neck to emote. I heard that a lot. Turns out you need the. But what was I saying? He wasn't ready, so our main character wasn't ready until well into the movie, and so that became its own kind of complicated way to shoot. We had to scramble and kind of shoot around him. So I always likened it to like a live action movie. Imagine if you're like your main hero, Hugh Jackman, played by Hugh Jackman, doesn't get to set for a long time. The agent keeps saying, "Oh, he's gonna get there. No, he's gonna be there." And meanwhile, you're working with all of these, hundreds of people to figure out how to get it made. And then these guys, especially this guy, and this guy, carefully putting it together like a puzzle. So that was some of the logistics. It's always hard to, voice actors. You want to ideally get them in the room together, but they're such big, wonderful named actors, and that's kind of hard. So it's a really fun puzzle piece, stop motion animation. You should all try it.
Well, Steve, in a way, the entire movie is a visual effect now, because in the old days when it was just models, that was one thing. Now it's computer graphics combined with simulated, effects, combined with map paintings, et cetera, et cetera.
Sure.
It's pretty complicated stuff. And how do you two do you, again, as a producer, do you look at the choice and say, this is better in CG because it's cheaper or more efficient?
No.
Or it's the
No.
only
And,
way?
you know,
or-
You gotta throw common sense
cheaper.
out the window. Yeah, forget about
It's
common
cheaper in
sense.
CG.
Yeah.
That everyone should know that. It's not cheaper, but we try to do everything in camera. And then there's sometimes somebody like Ollie over here, he's like, I don't want to make it in CG. I want to make it real and live. And so, I can't argue with that. That's how that goes.
The mission of the whole studio is it's about realizing the potential of stop motion animation and trying to take it to places and tell stories that have never been done before using this art form. So really, in terms of the digital side of things, it's about making sure that at the shot level we can always deliver the visuals and tell the story that Chris wants to tell without ever making any kind of concessions. Basically how the whole thing works is at the very beginning of the process, we all get into a room together and we're looking at storyboards. And when I'm in those meetings, I kind of keep my mouth shut. And then we talk about, we'll look at, say, an elephant that has to go through a jungle. And it's got 4 puppets riding on top of it. And everybody's thinking, oh my God, are we really going to build an elephant? And
I'm saying, yes,
Yeah.
yes, all right, please, let's do it.
And we all want to build the elephant. And so when the eyes come to me, usually I deflect over to Ollie and I'll say, what do you think, Ollie? Can we build an elephant? And then he picks up the ball. If Ollie says no, and then I start talking, but usually it just goes right to you.
Well, and for a lot of our work, there is, on the screen, there's a real mix. It's not just like you're seeing one shot that's CGI and then one shot that's stop motion. So whenever we're doing some CG work or some digital work, we're always producing kind of maquettes or we're doing tests, and we're really trying to kind of supply our VFX team with a really good touchstone of what this would look like if it was done in stop motion, so they can really expand the world and they become kind of harmonious.
Well, if I'm right, didn't that elephant have stretchable skin?
Yeah, the elephant we worked a lot on the skin. He had kind of like a carbon body muscle suit with stretchy skin under had this kind of gusset here. So we put a lot of effort into that elephant. He was kind of a little bit of a prize for us. So he had like a motion control howder, and he's kind of like 36 pounds. So he's being carried along on a motion control rig that we wrote some new software for the animators so they could actually track the cadence of the howder along with the 4 legs of the elephant and the camera move and the rig. So it was a really juicy.
Well, you had that
problem for
making of
us.
scene at the end of the elephant, and I think that always blows everybody away to see that. And didn't that take 3 months or something to do that?
To do that shot, that was I don't know if it was 3 months, but yeah, I wouldn't be surprised.
Bill, I have to add, at the end of the shot, you may remember there's a transition where the animation goes into the binoculars that Stank holds. And so when we were talking about how we were going to do the shot, the animator was supposed to give us something at the tail end of that we could cycle in order to be able to do that transition. And the animation we had gotten at the end of that, when the animator was done with the whole thing, we couldn't quite cycle it. And so I went back to production and I said, hey, listen, can we get the animator out there just to give us maybe another second and a half of something that is really, it's all about cycling the animation so we can get through that transition. And it was as if I was like Rumpelstiltskin asking for the child. And eventually production, they gave it to us. But just to get that additional animation cycle, it was like...
Whatever he wants. Sorry, I'm
Guys,
being
For those of you who don't know,
play nice.
in computer animation, it's so realistic because about 15 years ago they started this thing called muscle systems that drew under the skin, and so it's quite remarkable to see that in a stop motion model. It's pretty significant that the elephant, they weren't animating the surface; they were animating what was underneath, and the surface skin actually sort of was really, really fantastic advance.
Going back to your question at the beginning, it's true. I mean, at our core, at our heart, we're a stop motion company, and we're trying to just move along into the 21st century with this age-old, methodology of shooting. And so we really do want to just, that's what we do. So it isn't really even producerial so much as that's what we always want to do, is to build and make it and shoot it in camera if we can.
Nelson is a production designer in this film. It's a Victorian era film, but I think many people are surprised that it feels so much more lively than what we think of as the Victorian era. When we look at the Victorian era, we're looking at black and white photos, right? But
Right.
it wasn't really black and white back then, was it?
No, it wasn't. And you know, a lot of times when it's represented now in film, they use like, you know, desaturation or something to show like the old times, whatever. But of course, it was, you know, they used bright, colorful fabrics, and the sky was just as blue back then. And so yeah, we embraced that, and that was a fun thing about the look of the film was. Chris very early on said he wanted something very colorful and vibrant, and you know, Kubo had sort of gone into that world a little bit, but this we really wanted to come alive. And when Chris talked at the beginning about looking at National Geographic magazines, which I grew up with, and you know, going back and looking at those from the 40s and 50s, not the time period where the film took place, but just the printing and the color that they used was so vibrant but slightly distinctive. You know, it wasn't quite right. The reds are a bit carmine, and the blue is a little cyan. And so we viewed the film with that kind of color logic, and really amped up the color. And you know, you haven't seen a lot of stop frame films with that kind of thing. And it was very freeing, and it was fun to walk onto sets and see bright, colorful, clear color. And yeah, it was. That was a fun thing.
This is a stupid, redundant question under the situation, but when you're designing these things, especially like the boat that's going to end up with the CG water or these environments, any consideration to designing and how they're going to be moved, or you don't care about that?
No, but I don't care about, well, I care about it, but no, I don't. What I do care about, though, is can we actually do it? And that's one tricky thing with designing any film, I think, is you can't just be arrogant and say, like, you know, just build something impossible to make. So what we often do during the early stages is we do a lot of proof of concept work, and that is when we start to get closer to the illustrations being approved by Chris, then we start taking elements of that and have a very small, like 2-people design team just building some physical assets and photographing them out on set. And then I start to find out, can we actually do this? This, as Chris mentioning, like, you know, those bold silhouettes, the color we're after. There's a lot of patterning. What are the characters going to look like in front of all this stuff? So, you know, then I start to see, okay, we can do this. And then all the illustrations, I have more confidence about.
Brad, you know, animation's 24 frames per second, as you know. A lot of people do it on twos. They animate something for every other frame. This LAIKA, it's every frame. You guys are on ones all the time.
We only shoot on ones. Yeah,
I'm just curious. You know, in the world of animation, we call that animating straight ahead. Do animators have a thing like keyframes or targets that they're working toward, or how does an animator approach a 5-second scene if he's got to animate 120 frames right in a row? What does he do?
right. Well, I hate to ruin it, but we don't just go out once and go for it. Like we do blocks where we'll keyframe a performance, which sort of allows it to go into editorial to give, you know, so Chris can give notes to see what the animator's planning for performance, give notes on poses, on timing, and then we'll go out and we'll do a rehearsal so the animator can shoot. Then he or she shoots it on twos, so they get to practice the shot, animating 12 frames a second. If those of you don't know, it's you move the puppet and you take 2 frames, so it's moving 12 frames a second, and then it goes back into editorial, and then Chris can give notes again on what he likes, what he doesn't like, and then the animator goes out and shoots it on one. So oftentimes an animator will do a shot 3 times, so keyframed, on twos, and then on ones.
So the animator has the reference of what he did before, and you can follow that.
That's right.
So like, is the guy, the man or woman the animator, who's standing on the set under the lights for 9 hours a day, moving the armatures, is it the same person who's animating the faces in the computer?
They're involved in the faces, but there's a whole other team that animates the faces. So we have a facial animation team and a stop motion animation team, and they'll collaborate in the very beginning process of the face, where Chris gives notes, and then it just is handed off to the facial animation team to.
I'll usually do a launch with the facial animation team where we watch the scene and I talk through each shot, what I'm looking for from the facial performances, and we try to keep scenes dedicated to an animator, a stage animator, so they tend to sit in on those, so they're hearing exactly the same notes that the facial animators are hearing, and then as Brad says, they sit together and slug it out between them.
Because the best case scenario, they collaborate together. So as they're animating the face, it correlates to what the stop motion animator is planning to do on set with the body.
But the stop motion animators also, they do a lot of live action reference as well, which will really feed into the performance that the facial animator is doing as well. So there's a real circular process happening.
That's my favourite stuff, actually, the live-action reference that they shoot, because it's usually animators making absolute fools of themselves, and it's very entertaining to watch.
Is that on the DVD by any chance?
Yes,
Okay.
there's a short clip on there, I think.
One thing that blew me away in this movie, and I think it's the most advanced it's ever been, is this invisible motion that the audience may take for granted, but like the rocking hallway and the ship and the physics of that, and the tassels inside the cab, and then her earrings dangling with real physics. Can you talk a little bit about how you pulled that off?
So the stagecoach, Chris asked for tassels, and he didn't ask for like 1 or 2 tassels to the movie.
You know, I feel like I have to defend myself. Look, this is our chance.
There was, I think there was 180 tassels that had to be swinging through the motions of the stagecoach, which we love him
Tell
for.
them how that would have been
Right.
done in the old days.
So in the old days, that would have been done by hand. So the animator would have gone in there and would have nudged each one of those tassels. But because we use motion control, and we've used, Kubo, we started using motion control quite a lot, and this is a real kind of platform that we've started to use a lot more. And so that stagecoach was sitting on what we call a hexapod, which is kind of like a flight simulator. It kind of like moves as if kind of simulating the bouncing wheels on the desert floor. And then we have, on top of that, we have some motors that are kind of simulating the bouncing of the seats for the puppets to sit on. And then on top of that, we have the curtains. They're kind of like, there's a kind of like circular motion that they're getting pushed and pulled. And then the tassels, there's just these little push and pull rigs, and every other tassel is rigged to these push and pull rigs. So they're all being motion controlled 1 frame at a time. And then we did some live action reference for those tassels as well. We really get into the details. That's one of the great things about LAIKA. So we were able to just kind of just nudge them just a little 1 frame apart and just get a really organic motion out
I
of
noticed
something
that
that's
they
really
weren't all
static.
twinned. Yeah, that was the obvious thing. What about her earrings?
I've got to say though, this is not just showing off or frivolity, because the point was in the script that when these characters first get together, in terms of the story, they are not on the same level. They are not getting along. So I wanted all their scenes to be on literally shaky ground. So I wanted the conversation to happen in the stagecoach, and then another conversation to happen on the ship. Now, obviously, when I'm writing that, I'm thinking, this is clever. And then, of course, somebody has to actually make it happen. So, apologies.
No.
But
Gives
I
us
think
a
it
chance
was
to be
worth
clever too, doesn't it?
That's right.
It does, and it's terrific because all that stuff allows the animator, the stop motion animator, to concentrate on the character's performance and not have to worry about the tassels and the curtains and all that kind of stuff. But to answer your question, Bill, the Adelina's earrings, those were all teased by an X-Acto blade or tweezers by an animator's hands.
Those are hand animated dangles.
Yeah.
That's pretty darn impressive. That's really something. Yeah. Because, a lot of times character animators are not great at effectsy type things. They're focusing on gesture and pose, and the precision of that kind of physics is often something that they're not. So kudos to that animator, whoever that was.
A lot of our animators animate all of the effects in their scenes. I think of, like if Travis had animated on this movie, which he didn't. He does everything. Sometimes they do the spittle coming out of the mouths. They're all like practical effects. They really own. I think they do their best work when they own their scenes completely. They know what comes before it and ahead of it, and they just own the character and the environment. It's cool.
And I think it's a lot of the same people. This is film 5, like you said. So over the years, because we keep pushing it, I think the quality of the animation just keeps going up and up and up.
That's so apparent. Steve, a petabyte of data, is that what I read about? That's a lot of data. Try to describe how much that is, and also compare that to a fully animated feature. It seems to me like it's right in the same range as if there was no stop motion, almost that much data. Seems like you're pushing about as much data as if you did this all CG. Right?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest challenge on this entire film was just sheer scope and the number of environments. And like if you think about our past films, it was Coraline, we're at the Pink Palace, and then Paranorman, Black Hollow, Box Trolls, Cheese Bridge. Kubo was an odyssey, right? But it all took place in a mythological Japan. The thing about Missing Link was that we were going to do this kaleidoscopic travelogue and through real world environments, and we were going to be in London, and then we're going to be in the Pacific Northwest, and then in Santa Ana, California, and then we're going to cross the United States. We're in New York, across the Atlantic Ocean. We're in France. We're in Switzerland. We're in Nepal. We're climbing the Himalayas. We end up in the magical, Shangri-La. But beyond the fact that we had this huge scope and all these real-world environments, all these different environments, they also have, they have cultures as well that we also wanted to be very, very respectful of. So what we ended up doing was, we built a lot of digital assets for backgrounds. We did, I think the final number was 182 background digital puppets, which is more than double what we did on Kubo, and over 500 digital assets, so bottles and crates and things that the digital background characters would be interacting with. And again, it was just, we were chasing this authenticity for Chris with all these different environments. So yeah, it was about, just delivering on the scope of the story and Chris's vision. And in order to be able to do that, we had to build a lot of stuff, and it took a lot of data in order to be able to do it.
They also touch every pixel of the film. They are painting things out. They're painting out rigs and rods and seams and fixing pixels. And
I should also mention, by the way, is that even though it's twice the amount of work, it's the same crew. We do it all in-house. It's the same visual effects crew internally, and basically it was a lot of the same people that have worked on Kubo and Two Strings. We just needed twice as much stuff for the filmmaker. And in this case, we're chasing efficiencies and like ways to streamline. And one of the key things was Chris was the character designer, and that saved us because we could build a digital background puppet, take it right to the director, and he could say great, and then we could put it in the movie.
Chris, one last question for you. When you're conceiving this movie and conceiving the characters, do you think of actors and do you think of voices while you're writing? Because I think I read that you kind of got your dream cast, and when did you start to imagine who that dream cast would be?
I am definitely thinking of actors' voices when I'm writing. I think that helps when you're writing dialogue, especially when you're writing dialogue from characters from all different places, and especially even different species. So I have that in mind. The interesting thing for me is that when I start a project, obviously I'm British, so Lionel came very easy to me. And when I first recorded Zach, he had a way of like deconstructing my lines, like he'd move them around to fit his delivery. And just being in the booth with him, hearing him for that 4-hour session, that night I went home and I rewrote all his dialogue to try and take advantage of his own voice. So there is a little bit of back and forth. Yes, I got the cast that I really wanted. It was a gift, really. You write a list at the beginning of one of these things of people that you really want. I always wanted Hugh Jackman because Sir Lionel's he's a tricky character. He does some questionable things. He's not always pleasant. He's borderline sociopathic. So I knew that I wanted, if we were going to follow him on this quest, I knew that he had to be likable despite all his flaws, and that's where Hugh Jackman came in. And I waited for him for 6 months before he said yes, to the point where everyone was like, we have to start recording the main character soon, Chris. But I really, really wanted him, and obviously he's very, very busy. But it was because he's like the leading man who's very likable, so he can play that kind of character, and you're still with him. So yeah, a lot of thought goes into it at the very beginning. We have character designs, and we cut together reels of actors that we like using previous performances, and we play them against each other to see how they sound to each other. We do 2D animation tests against certain actors. We did a 2D animation test of a clip Hugh Jackman from Kate and Leopold, if anyone ever remembers that movie. But that we're constantly thinking about what voice is the best choice. You know?
Well, you made good choices for that. You know, I have a million more questions, but I know we're going to wrap this up. The good news for everybody here is that there's a reception and you can actually talk to these wonderful filmmakers and ask them your questions. And just the last thing I'd like to say is that, you know, being an older guy, I actually knew Ray Harryhausen, and I'm just sure that if he could see the work you're doing, he would be so happy to see not only your skill, but the obvious devotion and affection you have for this medium. I just think it's so wonderful and so magical. So let's give a round of applause for it. Thank you.
Thank you.